Sarah Chen stood at the entrance of Galactic Academy's main hall, fighting the urge to roll her eyes at the ridiculously ornate architecture. Really, who needs quantum crystalline pillars that shift through 17 dimensions? Show-offs. The registration drone buzzed officiously around her head, its monotonous voice reciting the school's illustrious history. Galactic Academy, established in the year of the Great Convergence 3472, has produced 47,892 distinguished graduates from 1,203 species. Fascinating, Sarah muttered, deliberately letting her shoulders slump forward in the universal posture of submission. She had perfected this look, the wide-eyed, slightly nervous human trying to fit in. It was almost too easy. A group of Zentorian students floated past, their crystalline bodies refracting the morning light into dazzling patterns. One of them deliberately bumped into her, their razor-sharp edges grazing her uniform. "Oh, look," the tallest Zentorian chimed, their voice like breaking glass. "They're letting mammals in now." "How?" "Quaint." Sarah stumbled backward, playing her part perfectly. Sorry," she stammered, clutching her datapad closer. Inside, she was calculating exactly how many ways she could disable a Zentorian's gravitational core. 17, to be exact. 18 if you counted the really messy one. The Academy's grand hall was filled with the galaxy's finest young minds. Void walkers from the Carina Nebula glided by in their negative spacesuits, while Quantum Hive members buzzed in perfect synchronization, their collective consciousness probably sharing jokes about the primitive human in their midst. "Class assignments are now being distributed," announced the school's AI, its holographic form materializing throughout the hall. "Please proceed to your designated learning pods." Sarah checked her schedule and had to bite back a laugh. Advanced combat training. Oh, this was going to be fun. Her first class was xenobiology, taught by Professor Xylith, a meridian with 12 sensory stalks, and what Sarah suspected was a serious superiority complex about bipedal species. The professor's opening lecture made that pretty clear. "Today we will discuss the fascinating limitations of single-brain organisms," Xylith announced, 3 of their stalks pointedly swiveling toward Sarah, particularly those still reliant on primitive protein-based neural networks. The class tittered. A swarm collective in the back actually vibrated with amusement, their 1,000 tiny components creating a harmonic laugh that set Sarah's teeth on edge. Miss Chen, Xylith called out, "Perhaps you could enlighten us about the average human's processing capacity." In simple terms, of course. Sarah cleared her throat, channeling every ounce of meekness she could muster. "Well, I'm not sure of the exact numbers, Professor. We don't really think about our brains that much." She paused, letting her voice waver slightly. "We're just happy they work." More laughter. A Quantum Hive member actually split into 3 separate entities from sheer amusement. "Indeed," Xylith said dryly. "How?" "Characteristic." The rest of the class passed in a blur of thinly veiled insults and scientific observations about human inadequacies. Sarah took dutiful notes, occasionally dropping her stylus or fumbling with her datapad for effect. Every mistake earned more snickers, more whispered comments, more proof that humans didn't belong in this prestigious institution. It wasn't until the end of the day, during the school-wide assembly, that things got interesting. "Attention, students," the dean's hologram announced, their multidimensional form shifting through patterns of authority and wisdom. "This year's combat training program will be different. Due to recent developments in the Outer Rim, all students will participate in mandatory tactical and strategic exercises." A murmur ran through the crowd. Sarah kept her expression carefully neutral, even as her fingers twitched ever so slightly. "These exercises will culminate in a school-wide tournament," the dean continued. "The winner will receive not only academic honors but also a commendation from the Galactic Defense Force itself." Now that got everyone's attention. The Zentorians crystallized in excitement, the Void Walkers rippled with anticipation, and the Quantum Hives buzzed with calculated probability matrices. Sarah just smiled. A tiny, quiet smile that nobody noticed. As she walked back to her dormitory pod that evening, she overheard 2 Meridian students discussing her chances in the tournament. The human won't last 5 minutes, one said, their sensory stalks waving dismissively. 5. That's generous. I give her 2 before she starts crying. Sarah kept walking, maintaining her carefully constructed facade of harmless humanity. Let them laugh. Let them mock. Let them believe whatever they wanted about human limitations and primitive neural networks. After all, the best disguise was the one your target created for themselves. And Sarah Chen, decorated veteran of the Nexus Wars, holder of the Stellar Cross with triple nova clusters, and the only human to ever successfully infiltrate and disable a swarm collective hive ship, was very, very good at disguises. She entered her room, waited for the door to seal, and finally let herself grin. Combat training tournament? Oh, this assignment was going to be even better than Command had promised. The next few weeks at Galactic Academy played out exactly as Sarah had anticipated. The mockery escalated, becoming more creative and, honestly, somewhat impressive in its astronomical ignorance about humans. Did you know a quantum hive member buzzed during lunch, splitting into multiple bodies for maximum dramatic effect, that humans actually need to shut down their consciousness for several hours each day? They call it sleep. How inefficient. Sarah picked at her synthesized protein cube, wondering if these superior beings knew that humans had perfected the art of sleeping with one eye open millennia ago. Probably not, since that particular detail had been carefully scrubbed from most public databases after the Nexus Wars. The combat training preparations were ramping up, and with them came the first whispers of trouble. Sarah caught fragments of worried conversations in the quantum encrypted channels she definitely wasn't supposed to be able to access. Border incursions increasing. Swarm activity in the outer rim. Missing colonies. Professor Xylith was particularly agitated these days, all 12 sensory stalks twitching erratically during lectures. Today's lesson on defensive adaptations is purely academic, of course, they announced, 4 stalks simultaneously checking the emergency exits. Though one cannot be too prepared in these interesting times. Sarah's classmates remained blissfully oblivious to the growing tension among the faculty. They were too busy placing bets on who would win the upcoming tournament. The odds against her were astronomical. She'd checked, several times, for amusement. 1,000 quantum credits says the human doesn't make it past the first round of Void, Walker declared, their negative spacesuit rippling with smug certainty. 2,000 says she faints at the first sign of combat as Zentorian chimed in, literally their crystalline form resonating with mirth. Sarah started disappearing at odd hours. Nothing too obvious, just small gaps in her visibility that could be explained away by human inefficiency. A missed study session here, a late arrival there. If anyone had been paying attention, really paying attention, they might have noticed that these disappearances coincided perfectly with the arrival of encrypted military transmissions at the Academy's quantum relay station. But nobody was paying attention. Nobody noticed when she accidentally dropped her datapad, displaying for a split second a tactical analysis of the Academy's defense systems. Nobody caught the meaning behind her clumsy stumbles that always seemed to happen near critical security nodes. The training sessions were the best part. Sarah maintained her facade of barely competent humanity with an artist's touch. She'd stumble through basic defensive stances, apologizing profusely while secretly marking every weakness, every flaw in her classmates' supposedly superior combat forms. No, Combat Instructor Kex, a retired Marshal Voidborn, bellowed during one particularly entertaining session. Chen, you're holding the plasma staff like it's a primitive cleaning implement. It's a weapon, not a broom. Sarah adjusted her grip slightly, making sure to leave exactly 7 fatal openings in her stance. The Zentorian she was sparring with took the bait immediately, their crystalline form surging forward in what they thought was an unstoppable attack pattern. She stumbled, of course. Fell backwards with a yelp that made half the class snicker. The Zentorian's victory pose was cut short by the realization that somehow, impossibly, their gravitational core had shifted 3 degrees off axis during the exchange. Luck, they muttered, trying to realign themselves. Pure primitive luck. Sarah apologized profusely, her eyes wide with manufactured concern. Nobody noticed her checking the time against the latest encrypted transmission schedule. The Academy's training arena was being modified for the tournament, transformed into a multi-dimensional combat zone that would test every species' unique abilities. Sarah spent her free time there, supposedly practicing her primitive combat skills. In reality, she was mapping every corner, every shadow, every possible angle of attack and defense. One evening, she was interrupted by Professor Xylith, who had apparently developed an interest in late-night arena inspections. "Miss Chen," they said, sensory stalks weaving patterns of suspicion in the air, rather dedicated for someone with limited capabilities. Sarah unleashed her most self-deprecating smile. "Just trying to avoid completely embarrassing myself, Professor. And myself's all I've got, being a single brain organism and all." Xylith's stalks twitched. For a moment, Sarah thought they might have finally seen through her act. But then the professor merely emanated a pattern of dismissive bioluminescence and glided away. The next day, during tactical theory class, a priority alert flashed across every screen in the academy. 3 colonies in the outer rim had gone dark. The swarm was on the move. Sarah watched her classmates' reactions carefully. The quantum hives buzzed with increased frequency, calculating probabilities. The Void Walkers' suits rippled with unease. The Zentorians' crystalline forms vibrated at frequencies that suggested fear. Merely a border skirmish, Professor Xylith announced, their stalks betraying their uncertainty. Nothing for students to concern themselves with. Now, back to our discussion of theoretical combat scenarios that will definitely never be needed in real life. That evening, Sarah received a heavily encrypted message on a frequency that officially didn't exist. She decoded it while pretending to struggle with basic xenobiology homework. Target approaching. Maintain cover. Await signal. She sent back a confirmation coded as a failed homework submission. Then she went back to being the harmless human transfer student, collecting an impressive array of bruises during combat practice and apologizing for her existence in 3 different languages. The tournament was 2 days away. The betting pools had reached ridiculous proportions. Current odds had her at 10,000 to 1 against making it past the first round. Sarah smiled her quiet smile and wondered if there was a way to place an anonymous bet on herself. For operational funds, of course, purely professional. In the Academy's Grand Hall, beneath the quantum crystalline pillars that still shifted through 17 dimensions, still ridiculous, a new display had been installed. It showed the tournament brackets, a complex hologram that adapted to each species' preferred method of visual processing. Sarah stood before it, deliberately taking too long to understand the simple diagram. Behind her, a group of Void Walkers whispered in frequencies they thought humans couldn't perceive. "Almost feel sorry for her. Doesn't stand a chance. Or why do they even let them in here?" Sarah Chen, veteran of 17 major battles, holder of records that were still classified, and the being personally responsible for the success of Operation Quantum Silence, adjusted her uniform awkwardly and dropped her datapad. Again. As she bent to pick it up, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the polished floor. For just a moment, her carefully maintained expression of mild confusion slipped, replaced by something ancient and dangerous and very, very human. The tournament couldn't come soon enough. Tournament day arrived with all the subtlety of a quantum explosion. The Academy's arena had been transformed into a sprawling, multi-dimensional battlefield, complete with gravity wells, phase shift zones, and Sarah noted with genuine amusement actual obstacle courses designed for primitive bipedal species. "Welcome, distinguished students," the dean's hologram proclaimed, flickering through patterns of ceremony and tradition. "Today's tournament will test not just your combat prowess, but your tactical wisdom, strategic thinking, and..." The speech was interrupted by a Zentorian crystal laugh. "Can we just start already? Some of us have actual chances of winning to pursue." Sarah stood in her designated corner, methodically checking her basic training gear with trembling fingers. Her first opponent, a Void Walker named Nexus, was already warming up with an impressive display of negative space manipulation. "Contestants ready." Sarah flashed back to her first real combat situation, the Battle of Nexus Prime. She'd had the same trembling fingers then, but for very different reasons. The neural toxin she'd been hit with had nearly liquefied her nervous system. She'd still completed the mission. Begin. Nexus struck first, their negative spacesuit warping reality itself as they launched forward. Sarah stumbled backwards, her movements clumsy but somehow always just out of reach. The crowd laughed. "Stop dancing," Human Nexus taunted, their voice echoing through multiple dimensions. "Face your defeat with what little dignity your species possesses." Sarah tripped over her own feet, landing hard. As she fell, she noticed Professor Zelith's sensory stalk suddenly go rigid with recognition. Interesting. The old Meridian wasn't as oblivious as they seemed. "I'm trying my best," Sarah called out, her voice cracking perfectly. She scrambled to her feet, deliberately leaving her right side exposed. Nexus took the bait. Their negative space form surged forward, ready to end the match with a single strike. At the last possible moment, Sarah's clumsy dodge turned into something else entirely, a movement so precise, so perfectly calculated, that it could only have come from years of combat experience. Nexus's own momentum carried them straight into a phase shift zone, their negative spacesuit briefly destabilizing. By the time they reformed, Sarah had already accidentally activated the gravity well behind them. Winner Sarah Chen. The silence that followed was deafening. "Lucky primitive," someone muttered. Sarah's next match was against a quantum hive. They split into 37 bodies, surrounding her in a display of tactical superiority. She responded by dropping her weapon. "Sorry," she called out, diving after it. Her dive took her through the exact path needed to disrupt the hive's quantum entanglement pattern. By the time she retrieved her weapon, apologizing profusely, the hive had lost synchronization and collapsed into chaos. Another victory. More stunned silence. Between matches, Sarah caught fragments of urgent conversations among the faculty. Professor Zelith was gesturing frantically with all 12 sensory stalks, pointing at old combat footage playing on their private display. The quarterfinals brought her face to face with a Zentorian champion. Their crystalline form sparkled with deadly grace as they launched into a series of attacks that should have ended the match instantly. Should have. Sarah's memories flickered to the crystalline campaign. 17 ways to disable a Zentorian's gravitational core. She used the 19th way, the one she'd invented during a particularly nasty skirmish in the Outer Rim. The Zentorian never even saw it coming. One moment they were executing a perfect crystal form strike, the next they were recalibrating their entire existence. In the semi-finals, Sarah faced a martial Voidborn. The crowd had stopped laughing. The betting pools had gone silent. Professor Zelith had disappeared entirely, along with several other faculty members. The Voidborn was good. Very good. They moved like shadow and struck like lightning, their combat form refined by generations of warrior tradition. Sarah moved like something else entirely. Her clumsy defenses gradually shifted, becoming more precise, more measured. Each stumble put her exactly where she needed to be. Each apology covered the sound of another perfect counterstrike. "Who are you?" the Voidborn demanded, their warrior's intuition finally recognizing what everyone else had missed. Sarah smiled her quiet smile. "Just a lucky primitive." The match ended with the Voidborn on their knees, their ancient combat form unraveled by techniques that weren't supposed to exist. The finals loomed. Sarah's opponent was a swarm collective, one of the most advanced combat entities in the Academy. As they took their positions, emergency alerts began flashing across every screen in the arena. The faculty box was empty now. In the distance, Sarah could hear the distinctive hum of military quantum drives entering orbit. The swarm collective spoke in their 1,000-voice chorus. "Your luck ends here, human." Sarah straightened up, finally letting her carefully constructed facade crack just a little. "About that," she said, her voice carrying the weight of countless battles, "I don't believe in luck." The collective attacked with perfect coordination, their 1,000 components moving in lethal harmony. Sarah moved to meet them, and this time there was nothing clumsy about it. She flowed through their attack pattern like water through crystal, her movements speaking of years spent studying swarm tactics. Each strike found gaps that shouldn't have existed. Each defense anticipated moves that hadn't yet been made. The collective's thousand voices spoke as one impossible. Sarah's response was interrupted by the sound of quantum alarms. The tournament forgotten, the entire arena turned to watch as emergency broadcasts filled every screen. The swarm had launched their attack. The outer rim was burning. Sarah stood in the center of the arena, no longer bothering to hide what she was. Around her, the collective's components shifted nervously, finally recognizing the predator in their midst. Match concluded, announced the tournament AI, its voice oddly subdued. Winner Sarah Chen. Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke. They all just watched as Sarah checked her tactical display, her movements now precise and deadly in their efficiency. The Academy's quantum crystalline pillars hummed with building energy as defense protocols activated. In the distance, battle cruisers moved into position. Sarah's quiet smile returned, but this time it held nothing of submission or meekness. This was the smile that had preceded some of the most decisive victories in human military history. The real tournament was about to begin. The emergency broadcast cut through all frequencies, its urgency overriding even the quantum encrypted channels. Attention all systems. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Swarm forces have breached the outer rim defense line. All civilian vessels are ordered to evacuate immediately. Sarah's combat gear materialized around her real gear, not the training equipment she'd been pretending to fumble with. The quantum crystalline pillars of the Academy pulsed red with warning lights as defense protocols engaged. Students, please proceed to your designated evacuation points. The dean's hologram flickered anxiously. This is not a. Belay that order. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos like a plasma blade through vacuum. Gone was the meek transfer student. In her place stood something else entirely, a commander, a veteran, a legend. The Galactic Defense Force materialized in the arena, their quantum teleportation signatures still settling. At their head stood Admiral Vex Thor, whose 7 eyes widened in recognition. Commander Chen, they said, dropping into a formal military salute. The intelligence division said you were in position, but a student, really? Sarah's grin was wolf-sharp. Best cover is the one they write for themselves, sir. Status report. The assembled students watched in stunned silence as their supposedly primitive classmate began rattling off military jargon and tactical assessments that would have made their most advanced strategic computers overheat. Did she just calculate quantum battle trajectories in her head? A quantum hive buzzed in disbelief. Impossible, muttered a Zentorian. Their neural networks can't possibly. That's where you're wrong, Professor Xylith interrupted, their sensory stalks weaving patterns of revelation. I finally remembered where I'd seen those movement patterns before. The Battle of Nexus Prime, the Crystalline Campaign, Operation Quantum Silence. The names fell like bombs in the stunned arena. The Ghost Commander, someone whispered. The one who... ... handedly collapsed the swarm hive ship. ... infiltrated the Crystal Fortress. ... rewrote the book on quantum warfare. Sarah was already accessing the Academy's defense grid, her fingers dancing across holographic controls with practiced ease. The swarm's using the Academy as a focal point, she announced. They think it's purely an educational facility. They don't know it's also the most sophisticated military installation in this sector. Admiral Vex Thor finished. Hidden in plain sight, just like you, Commander. The students who had spent months mocking her primitive nature watched as Sarah Chen, decorated veteran of the Nexus Wars, brought the Academy's full defensive capabilities online. The quantum crystalline pillars they'd all dismissed as decorative began shifting through military configurations that weren't supposed to exist. Sir Sarah addressed the Admiral while simultaneously coordinating 3 different battle groups. Request permission to activate Protocol Omega. Granted, Commander. Show them why humans are the galaxy's best-kept secret. Sarah's hands flew across the tactical displays, her movements precise and deadly. The same fingers that had spent months fumbling with basic training equipment now orchestrated a symphony of destruction. "You mean a Void Walker?" spoke up, their voice small, all this time when we were practicing combat. "She was studying our weaknesses," the swarm collective finished, their 1,000 voices harmonizing in dawning comprehension. "Not just studying," Sarah corrected, her eyes never leaving the tactical display. "Teaching. Every match, every clumsy encounter, I was showing you where you needed to improve. The swarm exploits the same weaknesses I demonstrated." The Academy's defenses roared to life, configurations shifting faster than even the quantum hives could track. Sarah's tactical genius, no longer hidden behind a mask of incompetence, blazed like a star going nova. "Commander Chen holds the Stellar Cross with Triple Nova Clusters," Admiral Vex Thor announced to the stunned audience. "She's personally responsible for developing half the combat techniques you've been learning, though the records credit various unknown tactical innovators." Sarah finally looked up from her work, meeting the eyes of her former tormentors. "Humans didn't join the Galactic Alliance because we needed to evolve," she said quietly. "We joined because you needed us to teach you how to survive." The enemy forces appeared on the tactical displays, their formation exactly where Sarah had predicted. The trap was set. "Now," she said, her quiet smile returning, "who's ready for their final exam?" 2 weeks after the swarm's failed invasion, Galactic Academy had changed. The quantum crystalline pillars still shifted through their dimensions, but now everyone understood their true purpose. Just like they finally understood the true purpose of having a human among them. Sarah stood at the front of the combat training hall, watching her former classmates practice the techniques she'd spent months failing to demonstrate. The Zentorians had finally corrected their gravitational core alignments. The Void Walkers had patched their dimensional weak points. Even the quantum hives had improved their synchronization patterns. Commander Chen, a Zentorian, approached, their crystalline form vibrating with what humans would recognize as embarrassment. "We owe you an apology. Many apologies, actually." "Save it," Sarah said, but not unkindly. "Put that energy into your combat forms instead. The swarm won't be gone forever." Professor Xylith, now openly working as a military liaison, watched from the corner as their former worst student conducted advanced combat drills. Their sensory stalks wove patterns of respect and, surprisingly, humor. "I suppose," they mused, "we should update our xenobiology texts regarding human neural networks." "Oh, I don't know," Sarah grinned. "Might be useful to keep a few misconceptions in circulation. Best disguise is the one your target creates for themselves, remember." The Academy's betting pools had taken on a new character. Now students wagered on who could master Sarah's techniques first, or who might be the next hidden military genius among them. Every transfer student was watched with a new kind of attention, not mockery, but curiosity. "The thing about humans," Sarah explained to a class of now attentive students, "is that we never evolved past our survival instincts. We just got really good at hiding them. Every human you mock might be another combat instructor in disguise, or they might just be a student trying to learn. The point is, you'll never know unless you look past appearances." On her desk sat a new plaque, delivered by Admiral Vex Thor himself. "Commander Sarah Chen, Combat Instructor First Class, Galactic Academy." Next to it, deliberately placed, was her old student ID card, complete with its catalog of failed combat assessments and remedial class recommendations. The best lessons, after all, were the ones that taught themselves. Now Sarah called out to her class, her quiet smile returning. "Who's ready to learn how a primitive single-brain organism can take down a swarm hive ship?" Every hand, appendage, and energy tendril in the room shot up. Even the quantum crystalline pillars seemed to lean in with interest. Somewhere in the galaxy, another human was probably being underestimated right now. And that, Sarah knew, was exactly how they liked it.